Today makes it 30 days before voters in Nigeria head to their polling units to make a choice about the leaders they will have for the next 4 years. As D-Day approaches, Election Central will help you with all the data and information surrounding Nigeria's 10th elections since the country returned to democracy in 1999. And of course, we have to look at what was thought to be a 2-horse race and has now become a 4-horse race, and one that many people are saying will be heavily contested for who will occupy Nigeria's Aso Rock. Previous voting patterns and incidents surrounding Nigeria's elections will help me and my guests to paint a picture of what the 2023 elections could look like. Today, the focus is on security, and there have been several security trends that we should take note of as the elections are literally knocking on the door. Don't forget to join the conversation on social media, News Central TV, those are our social media platforms, and also use the hashtag ElectionCentral to share your thoughts with us. And with just days to go, it's important we stay on top of all of the election trends and information. But always, let's start with the data. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, says the final number of registered Nigerian voters is 93,469,008. I wonder who those 8 are. Of that number, 37 million, about 39.5% of them, are young Nigerians between 18 and 34. That demographic is followed closely by those between 35 and 49 years of age, who account for 36.75% of registered voters at 33.4 million. 17,700,270 are, rather, maybe 18.94% of total registered voters are elderly voters between the ages of 50 and 69, with the remaining 5,000,000.2 somewhere around there, around 5.66% being senior citizens above the age of 70. 49 million, or 52.5%, if we look at it between males and females, are actually male, while the remaining 44.4 million, or 47.5%, are female voters. And still looking at the data, the turnout is one of the biggest issues that many have. We've noticed that turnout for Nigeria's elections has been on the decline since 2011, when out of 73.5 million registered voters, 56.68% turned out. In 2015, it was 67.4 million with a voter turnout of 43.65%. And in 2019, it was 84 million with a turnout of 35.66%. Will 2023 be the year that this trend is reversed? We all just have to wait to find out. And if projections would be based on Nigeria's previous elections, expectation is that we could possibly have less than a 50% voter. And some quick headlines for you to catch you up on what's been happening ahead of the elections. The deadline for Nigerians to collect their permanent voters' cards, or PVCs, is fast approaching, while there are calls for the Independent National Electoral Commission to further extend the deadline beyond January 29th. As of now, the deadline stands. There are concerns that many voters who have run into issues collecting their PVCs may be left out in the cold. Yaga Africa has also called on INEC to engage Nigeria's National Universities Commission so that universities and polytechnics do not schedule exams during the elections. And you might ask yourself why. That's because an estimated 3.5 million Nigerian students who would be affected if the academic timetable stands may not be able to vote. INEC said that students account for 40% of newly registered voters for this year's polls. And as we've told you before, voters between the ages of 18 and 34 make up 39.5% of registered voters. That's the majority. INEC has now commenced training of local government training officers on management of electoral training for Nigeria's February and March general elections. It is also doing hands-on training on the use of the bimodal voter accreditation system, also known as BVAS. The commission will use some 707,384 presiding officers, 17,685 supervisory presiding officers, and some 9,620 coalition officers for Nigeria's 176,846 polling units. In all, that's over 1.2 million personnel that INEC is looking to put in place. And one more number for you to add to this conversation. Now, how many party agents do you think it would take to keep an eye on things in Nigeria's 176,000 plus polling units. Well, according to reports, the number is around 1.5 million agents that will be the eyes and ears of Nigeria's 18 registered political parties at the various polling units across the country. And that's a lot of eyes and ears, but they may not be evenly spread out among the political parties, and some have a large percentage of that 1.5 plus. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we get straight into the conversation, which is looking at the security trends ahead of Nigeria's 2023 elections. What did previous elections tell us, and what do the projections also hold for what could happen in the coming weeks? Stick around. And right before we get to the guests, we want to give you a few important dates to note along the steps that will be taken as Nigerians get ready to vote. And of course, those are a few of the dates that will be quite important for you and for Nigerians in particular. That's when the collection of PVCs will end. The declaration and some of the information that will come out about, of course, the polling agents that will be used by the political parties. I hope I can get that on the screen behind me. And also around the dates that matter in this election. So Nigerians are collecting their PVCs. There's been conversation around the apathy that has been, of course, seen. And you can see right behind me, we're looking at January 30th, 2023, as when the time that INEC will, of course, be publishing a notice of polls as written out in Nigeria's constitution. We also have, of course, the February 23rd elections. That's the presidential and the National Assembly campaigns. February 25th, you have the end of the campaigns, there we go, for the political parties when it comes to the presidential and National Assembly elections. Then there's voting 2 days later on February the 25th. March 9th will also be the last day for the parties to campaign when it comes to governorship and state houses of assembly. And March 11th, the votes will happen. Two dates of very significant elections for Nigerians, and security is one of the issues at the top of the agenda. Security, or the lack of it, has been a major issue for Nigeria and Nigerians for several years now. The different analysis will show you how the different dimensions, scope, and depth of the country's security challenges are. But while the safety of their lives and property are top issues for many voters, even the issue of security around elections and voting is a concern. Unfortunately, Nigeria is not a stranger to electoral violence, which can, of course, affect voter turnout. Joining me now is Cheta Nwanze. He's the lead partner at SBM Intelligence, Nigeria's leading geopolitical intelligence platform. Looking like a spy from the Bourne movies. Cheta, welcome to Election Central. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm deep undercover somewhere.
It's fine. We'll take it like that. So let's look at this in terms of projecting ahead of the elections, but also using past trends to develop what we might think will happen. Depending on who you ask, you get a different take on how bad Nigeria's current security situation is. But when we narrow it down to electoral violence in particular, with the data you've gathered and with the data we've seen coming in from INEC, what does the data tell us about electoral violence?
So I think it's important to scope the landscape first. Nigeria's 6 geopolitical zones all have problems right now, and problems is just putting it mildly. From, if we talk about the pastoral conflict in the north central, to Boko Haram / ISWAP, whichever way you want to call it, northeast, to the bandit problem in the northwest, to the IPOP secessionist issue in the southeast, to the militancy / vandalism in the south, and to gangs in the southwest. It's democratized. And one thing that has been a trend over previous electoral cycles is that whenever there's existing violence or pre-existing violence, we have the problem of politicians hitting of the temperature and making things worse. This cycle so far has not been different. And in the year 2002, we tracked 57 incidents that were directly related to campaign or politicking, in which 27 people were unfortunately killed. That's something that has been a problem. That's something that's a cause of worry. And unfortunately, in terms of the work that we do, trying to separate politically related violence from your garden variety violence, if such a thing exists, is one of the difficult things that we try to do. So yes, there is violence. A lot of the violence has been around, for example, registration of votes, and then, of course, attacks on INEC offices.
Yes.
We've also seen politicians kidnapped, political rallies attacked in recent times. And I think it's important to point out that while there's a huge interest in this election, insecurity in reports that we have done, including one that we published on January 9th about voter turnout, insecurity has been on the mind of potential voters. So if anything will depress turnout this time around, insecurity is likely to be it.
So let's talk about something you mentioned, and that's the attack on INEC offices. INEC too has some data on that in regards to how many attacks there have been, and there's been a different dimension. They've linked some of them also to the protests that happened in 2020 and other political issues around. But more than 50 INEC offices have been attacked in the past 4 years, with the majority of the attacks happening particularly in the southeast and the south-south regions of Nigeria. Does SBM have a theory on why these regions, why attack INEC offices at all?
Well, we'll speak to the southeast specifically. A lot of the violence against INEC is in pursuit of the indigenous people of Biafra's mantra of no election without a referendum. So attacking basically the vestiges of the states in terms of INEC is a way to try to dissuade people from getting involved in electoral practice. And this, unfortunately, if you plot a chart of the attacks, even in the south, you will find that these are areas where the attacks happen, are areas that have Igbo-speaking populations. So it's largely the secessionist crew, if I can use that word. I think a better word to use is gangs. It's largely the secessionist gangs that are involved in this.
Okay, so you're tying the attacks in these regions, particularly in the south, as you said, to secessionist groups. Is that all?
Yes, it's the large one. It's difficult to. I'm not going to stand up and blame anybody when there isn't any data to support what I'm saying. But it's not impossible, or it's logical that a lot of the attacks have gone up on INEC as that mantra of no election without a referendum has really become a thing. So that is it's easy to tie a lot of the attacks to secessionists, but other attacks could be also rampant criminality.
So when we look at the trend of previous elections and previous electoral violence, what do you think we should be expecting with the 2023 elections? Because there's going to be some about 530,538 security personnel made up of the Nigerian police and the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Fund. And when you break down that number, that's about 14,400 security officials for Nigeria's 36 states and the FCT. But we've seen how electoral violence is not necessarily spread evenly across the country. So what do you think about it in terms of projections ahead of the elections? I do think that we might be having some technical issues there getting across to our guests. So looking at the conversation around security and the Nigeria 2023 elections, while there is some sort of spread when it comes to attack on INEC offices, that's not the only security threat that Nigerians might be considering when it comes to these elections. Of course, there's the background of electoral violence that may have a lingering history and an influence on voters in the coming polls. Let's see if Cheta is back. Cheta, are you with me now? All right, so we'll see if we can get him back. But you can see on the screen there data coming in from SBM Intelligence about 57 election-related attacks or election-related violence in Nigeria for 2022. INEC puts it at about 55 incidents spread over the past several years. And it's just the spread. You can see some of the concentration as well in the South-South linked to what my guest has said are possibly secessionist movements in the area as well. Okay, we may have lost Cheta. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll see if we get him back now. And before we wrap things up, thankfully, we're able to get Cheta Nwanze back, lead partner at SBM Intelligence, a leading geopolitical intelligence platform in Nigeria. Cheta, a very important question I must ask you before we leave the conversation for today. When you look at previous trends for electoral violence and you look at sort of the security situation and how it's different from region to region, what do you think we should expect for the 2023 elections with about 530-something thousand security personnel that are going to be deployed? Do we have a handle on security? Could Nigerians rest at ease knowing that they can go to the polls and they're going to be safe?
I doubt it. Part of the brinkmanship of the political class in Nigeria is to try to prevent people in areas that they perceive are dominated by their opponents from voting. One of the things that we saw, for example, in the 2019 elections was that a lot of the violence that happened on election day was in areas that were perceived to be PDP strongholds. So what this means is that even that we have things like beavers now, new technologies to try to minimize that risk, what we'll probably see is that quite a bit of the violence will be the kind of violence that will be targeted at preventing people from getting accredited in the first place. That's the key risk to the 2023 elections from my point of view. I'd like to apologize for my dropping off. The nature of my job means that I tend to travel to places where the network may not be good, but I'll promise that I'll come into the studio when I'm back in Lagos.
And we'll definitely hold you to that promise. We have 30 days to go, and there's still a lot more conversation to be had on this. But Cheta, because of time, we do have to let you go. But it's good to know that we're all keeping an eye on this. And unfortunately, your projection is one that may not give people comfort, but it does call for some movements and some actions to be taken, even with 30 days to go. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And elections for Nigerians are just around the corner. And of course, there's an opportunity for you with Election Central to find out how to vote, to find out your rights and your responsibility as a voter as well in Nigeria. But with 30 days to go till millions of Nigerians head to the polls, not a day goes by that the elections, the electoral process, governance, even democracy are not top of the conversations on the streets of social media. So I also took a stroll on those streets and came across something that struck me. So a picture by Chika Onu is asking Nigerians to stop praying to God to end insecurity, for God to heal Nigeria, for God to end fuel scarcity, and even for God to restore peace. Why? Because God has put the power to change things in the hands of Nigerians with their PVCs. And that's their power. All 93,469,008 registered Nigerian voters. The power is in their hands, and in 30 days, they will exercise that power. That's it for tonight. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Have a good evening.